Okay, so now we're going to go into Module 2. Specifically, we're going to go into Module 2A, which is about the reactivity of our bodies to what's going on in our minds. And I'm using this background to really plant the seed that it would be nice if we had a gauge in front of us for navigating our life the way we have gauges in our cars to track, our gasoline, our speed, so we don't get tickets, to know if the temperature is getting too hot or the car is lacking oil. These are kind of things I want to plant that seed that we need a similar system for our awareness of our bodies so that we don't ignore them. A lot of us were raised to kind of ignore very important data that the body and the mind produce. And we're going to talk about that. So this reviews real quick about Module 1. Are we on track? We build a little motivation in the person to do this kind of work. So we say, what's at stake? What is to be gained if these tools are helpful? What's going to change in your life? And people will say, oh, well, then I will be able to eat healthy again, or I'll lose some weight, or because I won't have all this anxious eating, or I'll be able to take my kids to Disneyland. I won't be afraid of crowds. I could take my wife to concerts. We used to love concerts. All sorts of things people put in this box. Then we want to make sure, but does this person, is this chapter going to apply? So does the person experience physical and emotional reactions to past events? Do they start crying when they hear a song? Oh, that was our song. Well, then, yeah, this is going to apply. Again, the veteran that hears things that sound like gunfire, that has to hide in a closet every 4th of July. I'm not making these things up, by the way. These are things that people told me when I was doing this as a psychologist. Okay, so there's all sorts of reactivity that people experience. And so here's a section now. Again, this has the triangle that you can put these away after you become really familiar with them or know how to do them by heart. But so in this first exercise, the idea, I'll just take you through what the script does. The idea is have the person really picture a lemon and describe this lemon and talk about a big, ripe, juicy lemon, and imagine bringing this lemon to your nose and taking a deep inhale, sniff of that lemon. Imagine tearing into the skin of the lemon with your fingernails, getting the juices on your face, keep peeling it back, and then take a big bite out of a juicy, ripe lemon. Most of us are going to have our mouths salivate. And this exercise is just to demonstrate that when people say, oh, this stuff is just in your mind, it's not true. It's also in our bodies. Our body is reacting. Saliva is getting ready to take in something sour or salty. If they don't get it with the lemon, you can try other things, picturing sour candy, or kind of an extreme is to imagine vomit. And a lot of us just get a little nauseous at the idea of vomit. So this is just to prove, to kind of establish, like, okay, are we on the right track here? And the idea that we want to take away the power from these mere words, right? I shouldn't be able to ruin your day just because I say it might rain on Saturday, and that's your wedding day. And now rain, this one word, this one syllable, is now causing all these emotional effects and physical effects on a person. We want to take that power back through these exercises. We want to be able to listen to songs and watch movies and read texts and not jump every time our cell phone buzzes with a new text. So the idea is that we want our brains to figure out how to move these things out of this overinterpretation as a major threat, a major problem. Here I use the example, it'd be crazy if we got a letter in the mail and we dropped over dead and our dog was watching us. It'd be like, what is that thing? A letter, the most that it can really give you is a paper cut. Now, is there a problem describing the letter? Yes. Whoever just had that heart attack and died got some very bad news. And I'm not unaware that we have real problems, but we're going to get into how the brain is misinterpreting these kinds of things. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I want to explain a little of why the body reacts in the first place. So there are these explanations. Again, we can close them off later, but for now I want to go through them. So it's the idea that when we encounter a major threat, any animal has three choices. It's called fight, flight, or freeze, or play dead. So now it turns out fight or flight. So we can either engage with the threat. If I got little kids, I might have to fight this lion that's loose, or I'm going to run. Those first two options require a lot of muscle. And it turns out muscles need two things. They need oxygen they need gasoline and oxygen. So adrenaline is our gasoline. Adrenaline is getting shoved into the bloodstream, as is air. When we run, we go, well, that's not a coincidence. That's our lower brain telling us to get more of that stuff so we can get it into the bloodstream. And then that's being sent throughout the body so that our muscles get those two, I'm oversimplifying, but those resources they need to then lift that car, fight that lion, run that mile. Okay, so it's a very orchestrated thing that our body's doing, and it's our lower brain that's calling those shots. I like to distinguish between the upper brain and the lower brain. It's like your forearm is your spinal cord that ends in this lower brain region, which I call the puppy, the animal, people call the reptile. This handles all the automatic stuff, like your breathing, your heart rate, your appetite, sex drive. All those kinds of things are handled here. And then if you put one of those big boxing gloves on this, that's your human brain. That's your frontal lobes, your prefrontal cerebral cortex. You have all those brain regions that do your conscious thinking. And often these two brains are not getting along. Often this one's going through something terrible, and the human one is saying, well, deal with it. Shut up. Just get back to work. Live your life. You should be over this by now. And it's a real bully. And that's not necessary. In fact, that's harmful. It delays feeling better. We want to learn to be gentle, to understand what we're being put through, what's going on, and be gentle. But so to continue with this, when we are in a full-on fight or flight thing, even if we freeze and don't move a muscle on the outside, we're getting depleted. And a lot of us end up sweating because the system is taxing our body, and the engine room ends up calling and saying, we can't take too much more of this. So then the signal comes, well, let's open the pores, let's start sweating. And so I like to call it a factory that's in full production mode. And again, the idea of freeze is kind of an override, like a little child suffering child abuse of some kind will often just freeze, but they survive. And so later it's harder to change that formula because it worked. And it's not a conscious choice. It's a lower brain choice that chose to freeze and let the person, the abuser, do what they were doing. And then it's very common that that person will be re-victimized later in life because their brain, they just kind of shut down when these things are happening. And they may not understand that that's happening. And so they get mad at themselves. They say, why didn't I scream? Why didn't I fight? And it's without training, it's not really a choice that you're making up here. It's a choice that's being made for you. We often call it being hijacked by that lower brain, by the limbic system, the center of emotional analysis and fear and safety analysis. Okay, so it's called fight, flight, or freeze. Some people have added fawn response, which is similar to freeze, where you just give in to what the abuser, what the person's doing, thinking if I cooperate, I can then escape. But that one already introduces a little bit of the frontal, so I prefer the first three. Anyway, we don't have to get into those debates. But so this little diagram, the idea that it's the lower brain that's calling these shots, and the frontal brain is kind of asleep while this is happening. You're sort of the executive, the president that's the last to know what's going on at the ground level of the company. Okay, so these are some techniques to help get out of the fight or flight and freeze mode, to learn to get your frontal lobes back online so you can do your better thinking. Actually, before we get to the techniques, the idea that there are some false alarms. This is when you would need such techniques to identify that there are some things we're just misperceiving, and the whole thing gets ignited for no reason. We see a hose, but think it's a snake, and we run inside. And we got to learn to stop and get a second look and confirm that what we're seeing is an actual threat, that it isn't just a memory, that it was something else. So number two, reminders and anniversaries of heartbreaking or threatening situations. So these are important. We could be watching TV, some smell could waft in the air and take us to some memory. There are just so many different ways we get triggered by these reminders or by a date on the calendar, a time of year, and we'll get into those. Nightmares, obviously, we can wake up sweating, heart pounding. It's because that lower part of the brain never sleeps. It's like there's a movie screen in the brain, and whatever's playing on that screen, the automatic brain is believing and doesn't know what's past, what's present. It's all now. Okay, then there are the modern 30-day problems. That letter you get from your bank or landlord, or things in email, or things in relationships where you're not in a life and death situation, but your body and mind are reacting as if you are. And we need to learn to handle those better. Then there's the fear of physical distress itself. I've had people that they run up a flight of steps and they forget that they just did that, but suddenly they feel like they're having a heart attack. And it's like, number one, you got to realize you just climbed all these stairs, but to realize that the brain is like a rumor mill where you miss a heartbeat and then you're like, "Ooh, what's up with my heart?" And then someone else hears, "Wait, is there something wrong with our heart? Yeah, we might be dying. Wait, are we dying?" And like it's this rumor mill and the whole system gets activated, and we need to learn to interrupt that and be the human being, be the person in charge. I call PTSD sometimes like it's like the dog is leading the human out of situations, saying, "You got to get me out of here." Great, I'll use my intelligence to figure out how to get us out of here. That is backwards. I have to say, no, let me use my intelligence to figure out if we're actually in danger or not, and learn to keep the dog in place. I really like that show, The Dog Whisperer, where Cesar Millan, most of his techniques involve just holding the leash with both hands really firmly until the dog can go through a transition of thinking it needs to react to something to realizing that when it just lies down and takes a nap and just sits there with enough repetitions, those huge reactions don't even happen anymore. And there's a reason. It has to be because the feared consequence never shows up. So we'll get more into those techniques. So number one, let's just confirm that the person you're helping is experiencing these things. Do they have the reactivity, the jumpiness? Do they have painful reactions to reminders and anniversaries? Are they having nightmares? Do they react to complicated long-term problems that need our brains? Are they reacting to those as if they're here and now emergencies? Do they have some of the fear of the physical symptoms themselves? Okay, so that would tell us, yep, we're on the right track. And so it seems like a good idea to go into the next module.